thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Dr. Nathan Castle will be doing the bulk of this webinar. Nathan is a clinical psychologist with a great deal of interest in deliberate practice, routine outcome monitoring, and data-enhanced supervision. It's our hope that we will be able to share with you today how to use data to improve supervision. And today is one of the rare webinars, I think, where we've invited both supervisees and supervisors to attend, because supervision is essentially a collaborative exercise, and so we really thought it would be of benefit to have both parties in the same training.
Can do. Thank you very much, Ben, for the intro. Lovely to see some people jumping on the chat, and we've got people from all around Australia and interstate, which is wonderful. Data enhanced supervision. From my end, I am a supervisor, but I've also been a supervisee. And two experiences that really jump out at me, especially before I was using any data in supervision as a supervisee, was bringing a client what felt like every single supervision. A client who was stuck, and I felt stuck, and really getting the sense that they weren't getting better, and having supervision where I felt like, okay, we're talking about things that are relevant to this client and increase my understanding, and I feel more confident, more clear. But that when I enacted those things in this next session, it wasn't shifting. And so almost this repeat kind of revolving door, bringing a client to supervision. And another story that really kind of resonates for me was being a supervisee that went to a great supervisor who had a real interest in attachment. That's less my lens, I guess. And feeling some urgency about wanting to do something different with this client. And we started talking about attachment, which for the first 5 or 10 minutes was really, really helpful and gave me a new perspective. But I started noticing actually that the minutes were going by, only getting about 50 minutes of supervision. And in the end, that's really all we talked about was attachment. And I left that feeling like I don't know exactly what this means for me and what I need to do in the next session, or importantly, to turn the therapy trajectory around for this client. So hopefully this is quite a different training for everyone involved, and one that helps to look at supervision in a traditionally different way. As we said before, we have both sides of the coin here, supervisees and supervisors, and we're going to focus in on separate skills and strategies for each, but both of you are going to be in parallel within your roles doing similar things, identifying stuck clients and being able to do that really quickly, not wasting any of your time, making sure that that's quick and simple, knowing how to use supervision to improve client outcomes. So making sure that the supervision session you have on Thursday makes an impact on Tuesday when you see that client, that it's not lost or not focused enough, that it doesn't have that impact. And to enhance meaningful collaboration in the relationship, really important when we're talking about what's at the core of our profession for support. So supervisors who are here will learn how to enhance supervision with measures of supervisee characteristics, all right? Really understanding the data also of the supervisee, and if they're open to that, as well as the client, of course, and their results. We're also going to talk about how to improve effective communication about stuck points for the supervisee to help them more, and to transfer those strategies to the client, and then to increase collaboration, to be able to create measurable goals for supervision, so there is a through line for the supervision sessions that you have. We're also going to, for supervisees, teach how to use outcome measures to quickly identify and prioritize which client on your caseload to bring or which clients to bring. Our hope is that supervision becomes more efficient with the structure we provide today so that you can get through practical strategies for the most amount of clients in the hour of supervision that you have. And there's 4 key steps that we really are going to recommend today that you have a conversation about with your supervisor, with each of your clients to help this process. Importantly, all of this is going to culminate in increased confidence and curiosity for the supervisees. And I think I'm interested, Ben, we have a bit of a poll ready to find out where the ratio is between supervisees and supervisors.
Yeah, so I've just launched the poll. Everyone should be able to see it. And let me share the results. So we've got 64% of people are supervisors, 28 are supervisees. Are you a NovoPsych user? 45% said yes, 32% said no, and 23% said they are, but they only use it infrequently. For those of you who are not a NovoPsych user yet, in a moment I'll put something in the chat box which will allow you to sign up for NovoPsych, because hopefully some of the content that you will learn today will help you translate that into using that software to make supervision better. And the question, do you do routine outcome monitoring? 40% said yes with most clients, 38% said with some clients, and 17% said rarely. Only 4% said never. So that's interesting. I wonder, Nathan, what are your reflections on those results?
Really high rates of use of routine outcome monitoring. So before we describe what data enhanced supervision is, we need to actually understand why it's important or why it's relevant. We've had supervision for over 100 years. It is a core part of what we do in therapy, and it's a tradition that we should continue to do. One of the things that is really interesting is that when you look at the clients that are brought to supervision, when you're not using data or outcome measures to kind of prioritize clients, sometimes we're just bringing the wrong clients in. And what's the wrong client? Okay, there's no hard and fast rule. Bring whoever you want. At the end of the day, if it's learning, wonderful, that's good. For my money though, if I'm paying for a supervisor and I've got that time, I want to bring clients who are not improving so that I can make a difference. And when we look at some of the clients that are getting brought in, sometimes they're actually clients that are doing quite well already. So they might not be the ones who are going to get the most benefit from supervision. And this is the key, the next part about why data enhanced supervision is particularly important. Supervision, when you actually look at studies about looking about how it changes client outcomes, there is no impact. It does not improve client results. And a lot of the thoughts are because when we do supervision, of course, it's mostly about clients. We're not lazy, we're not committed, but the client's over here. And often finding a way to transfer all of that to the client to make a change, that's where these things are getting lost. And data enhanced supervision really helps us to change that. Importantly as well, supervision does really well improving confidence, self-reflection, curiosity, all the things that we need as psychologists. But it actually doesn't lean into this enough. Data enhanced supervision can really make this even more robust to help people. And the other thing that I think in COVID times is self-care, which is something that we'll also talk about and is becoming more and more relevant for supervision. So this is why data enhanced supervision is important. And this is what it is, okay? Breaking it up into its component parts, being able to identify stuck cases, clients whose outcome measures are showing that they're not improving should be prioritized for supervision. We want to look at 4 key things in supervision. Supervisee confidence and curiosity. So ensuring this is always about learning, that the supervisee isn't getting, told by an expert everything that happens and they're kind of closing down what their own curiosity is. So it's a really strengths-based approach. The other step here is, what does the client want? We said that the client's over here, we want to bring them into the room. What is their therapy goal? Where do we want to get them to? What are the client preferences or feedback? What have they asked for in therapy so we can tailor it, in the supervision and discuss what's required? And then hypothesis testing, working together to hypothesize what you could do next and then finding out if it works. I talked about a through line across supervision. This is what I mean, okay? Your plan, you then make a scheduled date for follow-up. And you look at whether the client started getting better in their outcome measures. Did it make a difference? Really accountable here. If not, we do more, we change, we adapt. If so, we celebrate those wins. And then of course, data-enhanced supervision helps the relationship, measuring what's happening between you and the supervisee and supervisor to make sure that it's the best possible experience. So we're actually going to role play what this looks like. Ben, I'm going to get you out of the Zoom zone.
All right.
And I'm going to be the supervisee and I'm going to be supervisor and you're going to be supervisee of Sally.
Can I see your face more fully? Can you unshare your screen so I can look into your eyes and
of course.
tell you I need your support?
Okay. Can I at least point people to the fact that on the screen, we do have the results for Sally. And so this is the first point of call. Ben has brought in the DAS results showing that she's getting worse in her anxiety and her stress. And now I'll stop my share. We'll just have two heads, just like supervision. So Ben, thank you for bringing Sally to the table here. Could you tell me a bit about her before we get into 4 key questions?
Yeah, so I mean, I've seen Sally on 6 occasions now, and I've given her the DAS every second session. And the worrying thing is that she's getting worse. When I first met her in session number 1, she sort of had this really diffuse description of her problems. She said she's a bit stressed, she's not doing too well, she's got she's dissatisfied in a relationship. And I really found it hard to know, to formulate and think about what the actual problem was. And she didn't quite have the words to say what she wanted or what brought her there. So I'm a bit stuck with her.
Okay. First off, this is a really good case to bring, and I really want to commend you on bringing a great case to supervision that we might be able to turn around. I want to check in with you first. You're the one on the ground speaking to Sally. What's one thing that you're really kind of curious about, a question that you've thought of as you see Sally in the treatment?
Yeah. Well, I suppose the thing I'm most curious about is that she's now saying, oh, my problem's anxiety, but I think that there's a whole bunch of stuff happening under the surface, probably historically in her past. But, in the actual therapy session, she just talks about the stresses that she experienced that week and how she wasn't going that week. But I just think there's so much more to it, but I just can't put my finger on it or get to it.
Okay. So something about the historical, and it sounds like you're interested what's under the surface here.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested, the second key question I always ask in supervision is, what's the client's goal?
Well, the client in session number 1 didn't really have one. And I did ask, I said, what's the goal? Why are you here? And she sort of said, just to feel better, broadly. In subsequent sessions, and in particular, having administered the DAS with her 3 times, she has now reformulated, or I suppose we have both reformulated that goal of, it's pretty general still, is just reducing anxiety, given that the results are showing that anxiety is her key problem and depression really isn't an issue for her.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's it now, but not that well defined.
So it's getting more specific though as we talk, because she's saying, I want to reduce my anxiety. You're saying you want to know what's underneath the surface driving this anxiety. So you're aligned somewhere here. Has she said or given any feedback to you about how she wants her therapy, her preferences for therapy, or given you feedback directly about, how your therapy is and what she wants?
She says, that typical, I want strategies. I want strategies to fix my anxiety.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so we've brought her voice into this room and we can see how she's going here. I think we've got to hypothesize a little bit potential plans, because I really resonated with what you said around you feel like it's something historical, that there's something under the surface. The things that come to mind for me are things like trauma, are things like challenging relationships growing up, or things like perfectionism. Do any of these kinds of hypotheses ring true for you that you feel like might?
Well, I think that I don't think trauma, but I think maybe perfectionism would be it. I mean, she talks a lot about how she feels a great deal of pressure at work to perform in very highly, but I haven't necessarily talked about perfectionism explicitly. I'm not sure that she's not particularly psychologically minded, so maybe wouldn't know what perfectionism is, or may even endorse the idea that you have to have high standards to be a good human.
Okay, all right, this is interesting. So we kind of have a hypothesis here, a plan to try and test. I'm interested whether in your next session you go forward and ask her about perfectionism, and I would even go one step further, and if she's open to it, to do the perfectionism scale in NovaPsych and see how highly she rates there. Look at it together and collaborate, and be curious about whether this could possibly be a reason why her anxiety is high, and therefore for her goal, one of the targets to what she says, reduce anxiety with strategies.
Okay, so I mean, I could test that. I think it's, one of the hypotheses that I've got, but I could certainly administer her the perfectionism scale and see whether it's, the scores are sky high or whether they're just normal, and see whether that might be an underpinning factor.
Importantly, I want to catch up in a month's time after you had 2 more sessions, and for us to see how this impacts her results over time. Okay. That
sounds good.
Wonderful. All right, jumping out of role play, Nathan, and jumping back. Okay, well, let's have a look at your typical client that you might have and the results that could potentially come out of this once we follow up.
And I suppose the interesting thing with it is, in the first session, her DAS scores were pretty low on anxiety. Stress and depression was never a problem, but anxiety was pretty low, and then it got worse in the second session and the third administration. I mean, one hypothesis I've got about that is that it's just that she wasn't tuned in to herself. She was so tuned out of where she was at.
Yeah.
But then after the supervision session, hypothetically, we talked about perfectionism. She was able to identify that her unrelenting standards were at the heart of it. And she also found the questionnaire, the Frost multi-dimensional perfectionism scale, really helpful in that it created a tangible measure of an intangible concept. And now we've got this her and I have a shared formulation that perfectionism is at the heart of the cause of anxiety.
Yeah. And I think, for the way that I think of the value of this is, one time we did that in under 6 minutes, right? That's invaluable, but also to get to a point where there's a focus strategy. So not a huge have a talk about this, but a very focused strategy. This one, it was the scale, but of course, you know, it can be many things. The main thing is that you're getting to the point where how do we test this with the client? So you're bringing the client very much in every step to the supervision or the supervision to the client.
And I suppose the other thing with that is that sometimes in supervision, we might generate a hypothesis like trauma or perfectionism or whatever. You might go and test that hypothesis through conversationally in session or through a measurement. And you might come out like, no, that's not it. That's the wrong hypothesis.
It reminds me, so I do this all the time with clients. I mean, I don't always use hypothesis and all that, you know, normal language, normal people language. I literally last week got a client email me and say, would I be able to do the PCL5? I feel like there's some trauma in my background. And I was like, wow, that's rare. That's rare. I don't think we're going to expect that with all clients. Confidence and curiosity, again, two sides of coins. If we're too confident, our curiosity goes down because we're sure, we know what's happening. We're not necessarily attuned to the invitations or the things that are going against whatever hypothesis we have. If we're only curious and we don't have a sense of self and our direction and everything else, that can also lead to kind of self-criticism and these kind of things. So we want to have a balance there, that for the best kind of sustainable psychologists and mental health professionals that we can create. Looking also at client goals is just another way of bringing the client to the room. And the same with preferences and feedback, a way to tailor specific to this client. Because when we talk about formulations and models, it doesn't always lead us to tailoring to the specific needs of the client then and there. Sometimes it can just lead us a little bit off track. So we want to make sure that this is anchoring the conversations and supervision. So for supervisors here, we said that we're going to learn how to measure supervisee characteristics. These are my characteristics on a measure called the ProQual, okay, Professional Quality Life Scale, that essentially I do as a way to measure my self-care in particular, but it looks at compassion, satisfaction, fulfillment in work, in other words, my levels of burnout or secondary traumatic stress. And for me, you can see here that I'm highly satisfied with work, my burnout is a bit low, and my secondary traumatic stress is quite low. And it's just measuring sometimes that over time to see if there's any change. Making sure that number one, our supervisees are really feeling resilient and okay in their jobs. The other one that can be really helpful is professional self-doubt itself. You know, measuring that, this takes less than a minute to administer with supervisees and getting a sense of how much they self-doubt their abilities, doing therapy. You can see my results at the top being the first time that I administered this to myself, and that compared to experienced psychologists, I was sitting in the 78th percentile, so essentially the top quarter of experienced psychologists. But over the last 4 or 5 months, I've actually come down in my self-doubt, become more confident. You can see that line going down. Now, this is really good in supervision in our lives, but there's a caveat here. Higher professional self-doubt is actually associated with better outcomes with clients due to being more curious and more attuned to what's happening. So we do need to balance this out and make sure that supervisees aren't getting overly confident. And at the other end, making sure that they're not highly, highly, highly self-doubting to the point that it's just hard for them to work. There's got to be a balance either way. But for my money, this is a really lovely way to think about how we respond to the work that we do. Here's the other one that we can start to have a look at. This is looking at what supervisees need, as well as how to improve the relationship between supervisees and supervisors. Really interesting. Before I even talk about what's in front of us in the graph in front of us, it's important to note that there's a really great study out there looking at asking over 100 psychologists who are supervisees about the times that they hold back from disclosing things or hold back from talking about things that are important, okay, when they're in the supervision room. And they found that 97% would hold back some disclosures. One of the most common ones was about the alliance between the supervisor and the supervisee, that something had potentially gone off track, that they weren't feeling as confident, not getting what they need, or maybe felt criticized, any of these things. And importantly, they tied that to what was the supervisee's satisfaction. They noted that it was very much entwined. When those supervisees were holding back things, not talking about things that were important to them, the satisfaction with supervision went down. This has implications for one, the supervisee's well-being, but two, one of the best part of being a supervisor, in my experience, has been working in long-term supervision relationships with people, watching them grow, supporting them. You know, having low satisfaction can really be a risk of people just dropping out of the supervision. The other one that can be helpful is the supervision styles inventory. And this looks at the supervisee's experience of the supervisor in terms of being warm and friendly and supportive, in terms of the relationship being resourceful and perceptive, and their ability to be practical and task focused. We really recommend you do this in a particular way. When starting a relationship with a supervisee, ask them to fill out the supervision styles inventory on what they think they would like from a supervisor. Importantly here, what they think they would like. Get them to fill that out, and here we can see that the supervisee is kind of roughly putting all these domains of supervision in about the same space. They're all equally important. And then a few months later, the supervisee fills it out again, and the supervisor asks them, can you fill this out now based on how you experience my supervision? So not based on what you think you want, but on how you actually experience our relationship. And we can see here that in terms of warm, friendly, and supportive, that attractive domain, that red line, it's actually better than what they thought they needed. The sensitive part, being resourceful and perceptive, is around the same, maybe a little bit better. And the task-orientated part, of being practical and concrete, is a little bit lower. This invites a perfect conversation on how the supervisor might be able to be more task-orientated and what the supervisee thinks that looks like. So this really helps collaboration and the relationship. You're co-developing the supervision as it goes, really based on that supervisee. So some ways to bring curiosity to the relationship, what the supervisee needs and how you're going, is to start off with the counselling self-estimate inventory. And what this does is it looks at all these different domains of being a therapist. The supervisee fills out how they feel they are, how they estimate their skills to be. And then it's going to give some results on that. What this essentially says is what your supervisee might think that they need. We can see here that this supervisee rates really highly on cultural competence in particular. But one of the lowest scores is client behaviours. And when you look at the results that are interpreted on that report, it talks about things like clients who are ambivalent. This can really invite a lovely conversation to get to know your supervisee better. You know, as long as it's done in a way that talks about learning and growth, this could be an area that could be a focus of your supervision. So I really love this, really quick and easy. So let's talk about the supervisee in supervision. Knowing which clients to bring to supervision is actually half the battle. It's quick, it's easy via this method, but without doing it, you're always going to be going uphill because you might be bringing clients who are getting better or any of these other things. So always bringing clients to supervision that are getting worse or not improving, I guess is the right word here. Here's a perfect example on panic disorder severity scale, that this client over all their sessions is actually getting worse. What's happening in treatment is not making an impact to the severity of their panic disorder. And this is a resource we've developed, and we're going to send it through to all the attendees today. This is a data-enhanced supervision worksheet. One of the things about the fast-paced life of being a mental health professional is that it's sometimes you get to supervision. I don't know if you've experienced this as a supervisee, and you go, what am I going to talk about now? You know, you haven't actually thought it through. So we're going to send this through to people to trial. It's all hypothesis testing. You can see here, this is a client called Luke Butcher, 28-year-old male, single in IT with social anxiety, that has started CBT-focused treatment for 4 sessions. And his reason for seeking treatment is because he's scared to go back to work. The supervisee then writes what they are curious about. And we can see here that the supervisee is saying he seems like he doesn't want to try exposure, but he's actually saying, no, it's fine to do it if I ask him. And then those other questions that we talked about are already on the form. What are the client's goals for therapy in their words? This supervisee really left this blank. They didn't know. What the client's preferences are. This is supervisee said that he said, I want to help to make a decision about work. And the third question, what feedback has the client given so far? And the client was saying, I feel this is what I'm forced to do. So being able to fill this out prior to supervision is a way to set up supervision so it's the most effective for everyone involved. And just to let you know, this took me 4 minutes and 25 seconds to fill out. Really quick. We do believe that you can get more out of supervision, but if it's not fast and if it's not easy, no one's ever going to do it. So this is the actual results of what I had written there before about the client Luke Butcher. So the thought for the hypothesized plan here, if I just step back, was what was left blank here was the client's goals for therapy. You know, the supervisee was really unsure about what those were and what the client was wanting. And surely the client was kind of saying similar things. They weren't really clear themselves. So the plan here, or the hypothesis, was that if we could get some clarity over what that was for the client, then there'd be increased direction on where to go, probably more agency as well for the client to be able to head in a particular direction. So we talked about being able to get a goal that is specific in some ways, that is not just global, I want to be better, but really getting down to something that's practical. The supervisee put that into action at the next session with this client. The client was saying, my parents are disappointed in me. I got into IT so that I could buy a house and be stable, like they always said, and it doesn't even matter to them, and it makes him miserable. Now that's really good to know, but importantly to get a little bit deeper here about what the goal could be. He elaborated that he wanted the courage to leave IT and to live his life, and that actually he wanted to help people. And the supervisee asked a little bit more till they got to the point where the client could really clearly state that his value was to be authentic. So this is about being himself, not doing what other people are telling him to do. and to help others. And in the longer term, he actually wanted to do something like social work. So this became a very clear direction for where treatment was starting to go. Importantly, the follow-up. You can see here that the initial thought was social anxiety. Now that's right, the anxiety is still high, but the depression or depressive symptoms are going down so quick. The stress is going down so quick. I read into this a client who's feeling more hopeful, more confident, and more independent to be able to do the work of what's important to him, even though he might be feeling anxious at times because he's doing what's important to him. So really importantly here, this puts the supervisor and the supervisee on a closer dynamic in terms of power because you're both curious experts. The supervisor is never really going to know what the results are once you do the follow-up. They can't say, I knew that was going to happen, because we can't tell the future. So both of you are put in this position of being really curious, wanting to find out how it went either way. And I think that's a great way to create a dynamic that fosters learning. Throughout all of this, we've talked about how do we make this efficient and effective, right? For the relationship as well as all the way through to the client. I don't want people to lose sight of, especially in these times, how important it is to also celebrate the wins. So I would suggest for both of you, the supervisor looking out for things like identifying the right clients to talk about, clients doing exceptionally well and changing the course of therapy, especially in those follow-ups when things were going south and things are actually improving now based on what had been put in place in therapy. And importantly, always modeling and reinforcing curiosity and learning. This is the best space for us to get better for our clients and feel more confident. And for those, quarter of the room here are the attendees that are supervisees, I invite you to also bring these things to supervision at times to celebrate your own wins. I know that can feel hard to do at times, but that is a nice little exposure to go, this is what I'm proud of. It also tells your supervisor what you value. We always say from the trainings that at the end, we want you to be able to do something different, not just understand something differently. And so it was actually based off feedback in, I believe it was April, from an attendee. We always get people to do feedback. And they wrote in the feedback to us that they want essentially instructions of the things to focus on after training, an implementation summary, if you will. So that's what we've got here. We invite supervisors and supervisees to understand the supervisory alliance better. We know that for anything to work for clients, that's got to be in a good way. So prioritizing that with different types of outcome measures of either professional self-doubt or the counseling skills inventory, and also checking in about what supervisees are wanting out of supervision as well. The other part of this is to start identifying stuck cases with curiosity. Note those ones when you're having a look at the results of your DAS-21 or your Core 10 or your panic disorder scale, whatever you use. Notice the ones that are not going well and make a mental note, or better, a note in your calendar that the next time you go to supervision, that is going to be the case that you prioritize. And then start using the 4 key questions to learn. It's something to try to find out how you can bring the most value to that hour that you've got with your supervisor, and walk away with something that's tangible. I think that's the other part of this, being able to know exactly what to do in your next session. After you make that plan, make a date to follow it up. Put it in both your diaries and find out, curiously, what the result was for your client. If it was a win, celebrate. If not, more curiosity. Throw more of that curiosity out there to figure out why that might have been. And create a new plan, create a new follow-up, and check how that goes. So, this is what we wanted to put forward today for data enhanced supervision. Everyone's taken a slice out of their day for this, and we really appreciate that. We're going to stick around for some questions. There might be some questions potentially coming up in the chat. I can see the numbers go up.
Shirley's asked, how often would you recommend completing the ProQual and the professional self-doubt scale? Well, Nathan, what do you reckon about the ProQual?
ProQual, so I reckon there's two elements to this, really. When it comes to a supervisory relationship, how often you do it has got to be collaborative, really. You know, I've heard of people doing it twice a year, so every 6 months, and that's their check-in. I've heard of people doing it annually, and that's fine too. Do you do it? I know I do it every 3 months myself. That's actually not in supervision, but I think any combination of those things is good, as well as when you know it's part of your routine. I think supervisees are more likely to go, you know, I don't think I'm doing that well, and to invite that conversation and potentially do it ad hoc.
Yeah. I think having it as a routine part of supervision is pretty good, particularly at the start of supervision, to set an expectation of, hey, this is just part of the way I do supervision, and getting a baseline on what the, you know, where their burnout is at, where their secondary traumatic stress is at, where their compassion satisfaction is at. And then, yeah, I reckon every 3 to 6 months is a good way of doing it. Unless, of course, the supervisor and supervisee notice that, oh my gosh, something's going wrong. For me personally, I do the ProQual once every 3 months. I've set up it in NovoPsych, so it emails me once every 3 months, just so I'm checking in on myself to see how I'm doing. So I'm doing self-supervision and self-assessment per se. With the professional self-doubt scale that Shirley has asked about, I think that this is, again, pretty infrequently, maybe once every 6 months or once a year. But I think it's really important at the start of supervision to do it, you know, maybe in week 1, 2, or 3 of supervision, and then occasionally thereafter.
Yeah, they're nice combined assessments, to be honest, that kind of go together well.
Yeah. Kate said, what proportion of supervision would you assign to discussing cases versus reflecting on the supervisory relationship? Would you have separate sessions to discuss these things? My sense of that, Katie, rather, is that discussing the relationship is usually part of some sessions, maybe every second session, usually only for like 3 or 4 minutes at the start or the end. But then there are some sessions, particularly at the very start of supervision, perhaps if you're in the registrar program or something at the end of supervision, or the midway point, is how I would do it. Nathan, what do you think about that?
I think the most important thing is to develop a culture of normality about it, so it's never felt like it's sprung on. So that's why it's important to do at the start and go, you know, I do this every now and then, or I do this every 3 months, or whatever, and that we'll always be talking about relationship, and I invite you to tell me anything and everything where we're off track. I think as long as you do these things, you're probably not going to misstep. But if it's never talked about, and then suddenly the client comes in, supervisee comes in, and, you know, it's a serious discussion and we're talking about these things, I think it can be jarring in those modes. So I think the culture is the vital part of this.
But it's 12:30, so I think we might be finishing up. Thank you for participating in today's webinar, and Nathan, thank you very much for running today. I hope that you can integrate at least a couple of things that you learnt today into how you do supervision, or just how you use some of the assessments in NeuroPsych to reflect on your own professional self-confidence or burnout. Take care.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Bye.